Hi guys, I'm so glad you came to join me today. We're going to be painting for Halloween. I absolutely love Halloween. It's one day out of the year, but I love painting for this particular holiday. It's always so much fun. You can get away with using colors you wouldn't ordinarily use. So this is the one we're doing today. I love this. It has that sort of quintessential gothic look with the big purple and black velvet ribbons and big blood red roses. Of course, you have to have a skull, and then the whole thing is painted onto a very traditional pumpkin. So this one is a lot of fun. It is an easy paint. It's very loose. You can just relax. So if you're not really confident with perhaps floating and highlighting, shading and highlighting, you don't really have to rely too much on it in this one. So because of the color palette that we're going to use. So this one is going to be a lot of fun. So grab some brushes, pour yourself a cup of tea, and get ready to paint Pretty Pumpkin. This one is super easy and a lot of fun to paint. Now the pattern includes a line drawing for a 6-inch pumpkin, which is what I've got here. My base color for this one is Warm Sunset, which is this wonderful Decor color. It's a little bit more orange than a terracotta. It's a really nice, rich, deep, very muddy orange. I love this color. It makes a great base for this kind of painting. So this Warm Sunset, I've got 2 coats on here. And I've started my shading on this, and I'm using a little bit of thinned asphaltum and shaded into the creases of the pumpkin. And I've let this dry really well. And then we're going to shade underneath the ribbons and up underneath the flowers with another float of asphaltum. This does not have to be an absolutely perfect float, so don't kill yourself trying to get it that way. We just want to build a little shadow underneath this bow and these roses. And it's pretty simple. So I'm going to dry that real quick. Love pumpkins for Halloween. Like roses for, I like the whole gothic thing at Halloween. I love seeing those elaborate frames and things like that. So that just appeals to me. And I love this color palette, the very traditional black purples, high acid greens and things like that. It's just a fun color palette to work with. If you're looking for the pattern, it is available on the website. And the pattern includes the line drawing and instructions for the smaller pumpkin as well as the big 10-inch. This one is 6 inches and the other one is 10. So I'm going to rinse out my brush. And we're going to do our pumpkin first. Now I've got, as we used the Warm Sunset for the base, our first layer of highlight is going to be done with Canyon Orange. It's very similar to the Warm Sunset, except it's a little more orange, a little more fiery. So I'm using an angled shader, and on those, opposite that shadow, we're going to just put a very loose, I don't even really want to call it a float, but just a loose highlight right up against that shadow. And it's going to come about maybe a third of the way, maybe halfway to the center, like so. This is fast and dirty. It is not a perfect float. Don't kill yourself trying to get it absolutely perfect, because it's not going to be. And quite honestly, we don't want it to be. And then on the outside edge, we're going to do the same thing. Really loose, nothing meticulous. And because it's Halloween and nothing is perfect, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So that little highlight with Canyon Orange. And this is where you start to see some of the heat of that orange on our pumpkin. Because the Warm Sunset is very rich and very deep. It's not a fiery orange, but we want a little bit of fire. A little bit. So there's that Canyon Orange. And that's also what makes these shadows look a little bit deeper, getting that contrast and that highlight. So there's that punch of orange I love. It's one of those neatness doesn't count and perfection is to be avoided at all cost things. I love it. I like that this is, you know, easy enough to do. And I want to bring that. There we go. Wasn't getting it quite far enough in, but there we go. All right, so we've got that first layer of orange in. I just love how that looks. And as I said, it's not a perfect float. We're just getting some lighter value in. So then we need our third layer of orange, which is this one. This is bright orange. Now, if ever there was a pumpkin orange, this is it. I love this color, and this is our highlight, one of them anyway. And it's going to look almost yellow when you put that on, almost. And it's going to go right over top of that canyon orange. And again, we're not looking for perfection. I just love the brightness, the light, the zing that this brings. Oops. I got a little too much paint on my brush. I'm going to soften that. There we go. And then I'm going to bring a little bit just to the edge, like so. And again, same thing to the other side. Now the really fun part about this, because these colors are so transparent, I'm not really having to do much as far as the line drawings for the lettering. I can still see my lettering right through it, so I don't have to worry about overworking that. There we go. We're not looking for the utterly perfect pumpkin, just a pretty one. There we go. And same thing on the outside edge here. It's just a little highlight. Make sure you take it up onto the top. Like so. I love it. Our pumpkin is looking brighter already. I was aiming for a more painterly look, less toe painted. I want this pumpkin to have a little texture and a little character. So I'm not looking for those absolutely perfect floats. Now my highlight color in this is gold, or sunset gold, which is this one here. It's sort of a mustardy yellow, but it's quite transparent, and it really looks great with these oranges because it's in that same color family. It's falling into that same thing. So I'm going to use a little bit of that yellow, which I love, and I've got a little too much on my brush here. Way too much on my brush. Good Lord. Ever have a day? Yeah? Okay. There we go. It's just paint. Mess it up. You can always paint over it. It's nothing to worry about, you know. Okay. I'm going to try this again. There we go. That's better. So that little punch of yellow, much better. I didn't have enough moisture in my brush when I put this on, so I got a mess. We do the same thing on the other side. Make sure you get a little bit of water, a little bit of glaze in your brush. There we are. Much better. You could do this with an angled shader too. I don't want to call it a float because it really isn't. I'm just sort of putting a little wash of that bright yellow on there. But you could certainly float it on if you so chose. There we go. I'm just going to put a wash of that yellow. And voila. I'm just going to dry brush a little highlight on there. And voila. I'm going to dry this. And the next thing we're going to tackle is that bow, that big bow at the top. Now, all of our highlights on this pumpkin, they do look a little rough, but we are not finished with that yet. So one of my favorite colors to work with is lavender, and I love lavender with black. It's kind of bold, but it works really well. So I'm using just a dry brush. Doesn't have to be anything anything fancy. You can use a small stencil brush if you want to. It'll work just fine. So we're going to dry brush a little lavender right here and across the top so that it sort of forms the upper edge of that bow. See what I mean? Just forms sort of a loose oval with a black interior. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So there's the top, and there is the bottom. So it leaves that sort of open space at the top of the bow. And then we're going to make a straight line coming out like so. Just a little dry brush. Looks like a V. Like cat whiskers almost. See? Down and away, up and away. And we're going to do that on both sides. Up and away. And then down and away. Now you understand why I didn't base coat the rest of these elements in here until I did after I do the bow. So once you have those little whiskered like looks, we're going to do the outer edge of the bow. So. And this helps form that velvety look and the creases in our bow. There we are. I love that dry brushed look at the edge of a bow. So by the time we're done, this will have sort of a velvety appearance to it, so that our bow is going to have some structure and some texture. Now, we're going to put a highlight on our bow here, Just dry brush that space, and again down to the point, like so. It doesn't have to come right to the edge, but close. So if you miss the edge, that's okay. So essentially just dry brushing this surface with a little purple, that lavender tone. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Just like that. And then once you have those two sides done, you're going to put a highlight in on the upper left side. And it's going to just look a little bit brighter than the rest of it. So it gives the impression that there's a highlight there. And the same thing over here. So now we have this really great little purple bow. Not too bad. We do need to brighten that highlight a little bit, so I'm going to use a little bit of warm white. Just a little. We do not want a ton of this color. And I put it on the dirty brush, so I kind of get a pale lavender color out of it instead of just a harsh white. And this is where we add significant highlights. Right here. That's where your brightest highlight is. And on this part, so we don't have a glaring white highlight, but we do have a nice little lavender highlight. And if you focus on just those little edges and those 3 whisker-like lines that come off, you end up with a really nicely textured bow. It just takes on this soft velvety look. So that lighter color. Now to really define this, we're going to need a float of lamp black. Now I'm using a 3/8 angle and a little bit of lamp black. And we're going to give that bow a little more crispness and a little more substance by putting a float, just a little float. Where'd I go? There I went. Inside that open area of the bow. Just crisps things up nicely and helps give the bow a little more substance. And we're going to do the same thing underneath the bow. Now that float's going to come right up to the edge of the bow, nice and tight, so that you get a nice transition. And that little bit of black, I know it sounds funny, but black on black, that little float will do so much for how this bow looks. It just enhances that texture dramatically. So look at how nice and velvety our bow looks. I'm going to take that little bit of the black into that fold, into that crease, deep into that crease like that. And then we end up with a really striking bow. Lots of fun. So I'm going to dry brush here, or dry this real quick. I'm going to bring a little more white into the bow in just a couple of places, just to kind of make it look a little bit brighter. I just find my bow is a little wanting. So I wanted to brighten that. most particularly at the edges of these shadows. Just, yeah, just wanted to brighten it a little bit. There we go. It always amazes me how little, just punching up a little highlight and doing it in, if you do it in a controlled fashion, use just small quantities or use it sparingly, it can have such a great impact. Love it. So there's our little bow. Now I need a little bit more warm white, and I need some lamp black. The skull on this little guy, we need to paint the inside of these skulls. The ocular cavity, that little space where the eyeballs would have been. I like to paint that in black. Da, da, da. Now everything I'm doing on this one applies to that big one. So there, I have black eyeballs. There's my small round. So the leaf color, we're going to fill in these leaves now. The leaf color that I've used for this, I usually use antique greens and things like that, but I wanted an amped up green, so I'm using New Leaf. This is that new color from Decort. And I like being able to put this in after the fact, once everything else is done, because then I just get a nicer finish. Now this green is a little on the transparent side, so you may have to put a second coat on. You may. I have a little too much water in mine, so it's not covering as well as it usually does, but it's okay. We are putting a pile of other colors over top of this, so it doesn't really matter. Such a pretty green. Again, it has that, it's a really bright green, so it really stands up nicely. Gives you nice contrast over top of all of that purple. I really like it with the purple. And I like it with red. It really stands up nicely to the red. It's a pretty vibrant green. There we are. And I've got one more leaf right here. And I'm going to quickly have a look and make sure that I haven't missed anything. I'm batting 1,000 these days. I have a tendency to miss a bunch of things. I know what I'm missing. I had an adorable little and that's what I'm missing. I whoopsied. I need a little leaf over here. There we go. Now, I messed up. Surprise. But quite honestly, it's a pretty easy fix. So over here, I'm going to dry this real quick. On this side of my little rose here, I painted it green, and I shouldn't have. It's actually a petal. So I'm going to put it back in, because if I don't, then the flower is going to look a little wonky because it will be missing a petal. So I'm putting that red over top of that green, and that red is going to look a little bleh for a bit till we get all those highlights in. Now, when you're base coating all of these red petals, when you're coming up against another petal, leave a thin, narrow space. And I mean, as thin as you can get it, but just leave a space so that you can see where your next petal is and where your shading marcation is. So you'll know where your petals get shaded and where those petals are separated. Now, if I were using a more transparent red, I could just base coat over top of the line drawing and I would still see it, but I can't guarantee that that's what will happen with this country red, especially over the orange. So I'm leaving a very thin, narrow space in here. So I can see where all my petals are. It will make shading and whatnot a little easier in the end. I don't like having to retrace line drawings on. I just always find they never seem to be as accurate. And so over the years, I've developed this habit of leaving a tiny little space. Tiny little space. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you guys can see what I mean by a narrow space. So, goodness gracious. I zoomed in a bit too much. There we go. You see that tiny little space in between each of those petals? That's what I mean. Just makes things a little easier in the end. Well, now the roses that I chose for this are not realistic roses. They're actually based on tattoo style. I tend to do that with some things, particularly Gothic and Halloween things. I'm kind of obsessed with the whole tattoo style of creating art, and so I tend to put some of it into some of these designs from time to time because I really like the look of it. It holds appeal. That's, I think, is the word I'm looking for. So you can see the red that went over top of that green is significantly darker. So I'm going to show you how to fix that in just a second. There we are. Goodness gracious. It's a lot of petals. Didn't seem like that many when I was designing it. And I like all those little spaces. It makes things so much simpler. Particularly when it comes time for the shading element. So let's talk about this. Green historically is used to subdue reds. I shouldn't say historically, but it's used frequently to subdue reds. And in this case, it just took the life right out of it. So I'm going to take a little bit of that warm white and a little bit of that sunset gold, and I'm going to put a little bit of a yellowish white base color over top of that. Just a little. I think white would make it look too pink, so I added a little of the yellow. And I'm going to dry it, and then I'm going to put a quick coat of warm sunset on it. Essentially, I put the white and the yellow over top of that to kill off the green. And I'm going to put our original base coat, because that's what this is over top of it. Like so. So now we have our original base color that is underneath that red. I'm going to make sure it's good and dry. And now I can come back in with that country red. And I know I say it an awful lot that you need a color underneath reds to give them some vibrancy. One of those colors is not green. It will just suck the life right out of it. So there we go. And we're back to the original red that we need for our base color. So anytime that you've accidentally put green down, especially if you're using red, it's a good idea to block it first so that it doesn't continue to affect the color as you put it on. So in this case, I went to a lighter value, went to a sort of a yellow, a light yellow color, and then I put the original base color down, which was this warm sunset, and then I went back in with my country red. And so now I've got a nice uniform red for my roses. So now I can go in and base coat the rest of these roses, rose petals, with country red. Green dramatically affects reds. And that should be a leaf. I kid you not, batting 1,000 today. So there we are. Almost done with this. Now I'm going to be using a small angled shader. I'm using a 3/8 to go in and shade these petals. So you need something fairly small so that you can get in there nice and tight. You can get into those little tight spots easily, because this is a small rose. It's not a big open space. So we want something that will get in there nice and tight. And I'm fond of my 3/8. I find it's a very functional and practical size for a variety of things. So it's usually a 3/8 for me, and I don't often go much smaller. But if you are more comfortable using a smaller shader, whether it's a bright shader, a flat shader, or an angled shader, doesn't matter. If you're more comfortable with the smaller size, then by all means, go with the smaller size. And the other thing you have to remember is when you're floating, make sure you've got the whole chisel edge of the brush on the surface. If you load it properly, load the brush, so you get all the color the way it's supposed to be, which is a gradient. And then you use the whole chisel edge of the brush. Oh, it's going to be so much simpler to get a nice float, to get a nice gradient and that nice transition from dark to light. And then, of course, I'm going to scare everybody and use a dark blue to shade these reds. And I already know what you're thinking. Why? Why blue? And I'm going to base coat my leaf in here, which, how I missed this, I have no idea. Thought it was a petal. Now I know it's a leaf. So there's one. And then this one down here that I started to paint is also a petal, a leaf. Good gravy. There we are. And I want to just quickly put a second coat on that little leaf. There we are. Looking so much better. So if you're wondering, I'm leaving that skull right to the very end because I want to be able to get everything to look nice and clean, and it's easier to do if I don't have to worry about painting over top of a white head. So I have my paper towel here.